Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. The Pyramid of Khafre is the second largest pyramid in Egypt, situated in the centre of the Giza Plateau and standing some 136.4 metres or 448 feet in height. Today it is somewhat dilapidated. We're of course not seeing its final form, and, on completion, it is thought to have been around 7 metres or 23 feet taller. This means that in the 4th dynasty, 4,500 years ago, the Khafre Pyramid would have been just 3 metres shorter than the Great Pyramid. But was this really the plan? Wouldn't Khafre try and top the building achievement of his father, and build an even bigger pyramid next to the Great Pyramid? Interestingly, there is a hypothesis out there that the Pyramid of Khafre as we know it today was not how it was originally planned. Italian scholars Maragioglio and Rinaldi, who for the rest of this video are referred to as M and R for obvious reasons, suggest that Khafre's architect planned a pyramid that was not just wider, but also nearly 20 metres taller than his father's Great Pyramid, which really is quite substantial. The base length of the Khafre Pyramid is 215.5 metres, or 411 cubits, and this is compared to the 230 metre, or 440 cubit base length of the Great Pyramid. But according to the hypothesis put forward by M&R, the base of Khafre's pyramid was originally going to be 246 metres or 470 cubits in length, meaning it would be substantially bigger than it is today. The Giza Plateau could have looked something like this, and if the hypothesis is correct, and if everything went according to plan, today we could have been calling the Middle Pyramid the Great Pyramid instead. The idea may seem out there, too far-fetched for some, but there is some evidence to back up the claims, and after researching the subject this week, I also have my own adaptation to the hypothesis, one that may explain the evidence even better. I'll come to that later in the video. So what evidence did M&R present to support their hypothesis, that the Khafre Pyramid was planned to be bigger? Well, once again I've turned to the wonderful work of Keith Hamilton, in his Layman's Guide to the Khafre Pyramid, where he lays out the key takeaways from M&R's hypothesis. This is M&R's plan diagram of the Khafre Pyramid, with the enclosure wall coloured in yellow by Hamilton. This wall is believed to have been 8 metres high and 3.14 metres in width, and there was a paved courtyard between the wall and the pyramid. But M&R highlight 2 massive piers or terraces that extend beyond the northeast and southeastern corners of the pyramid. They're built from massive blocks of limestone, with the limit of the northern terrace merging into the northern quarry face. The southern terrace is less well defined and is apparently somewhat decayed today. Nobody knows the reason these massive terraces were built, but M&R suggests that this pyramid was planned to be much bigger, and these terraces were created as foundations to support the pyramid masonry that was set to be laid on top. So, a larger pyramid could explain the strange terraces, and it could also explain the 2 entrances into the pyramid. As we know, there are 2 ways into the structure, both of which are on the northern side, one of which begins in the paved courtyard away from the pyramid in the ground, and the second is on the northern face of the pyramid itself. Both of these entrances are placed around 12.45 metres or 24 cubits east of the pyramid's north-south axis. If M&R's hypothesis is correct that the base length of the Khafre Pyramid was originally planned to be 470 cubits, the cross-section of the pyramid now looks like this, with the lower entrance now starting in the masonry, around 6.5 metres above the pyramid's base. For reference, The entrance to the Great Pyramid is 17 metres above its base, the Bent Pyramids is 12 metres, and the Red Pyramid over 28 metres. So, being just 6.5 metres from the ground may seem a bit low for a major pyramid, but having a low entrance is not uncommon, as the entrance into Menkaures pyramid is even lower, at just 4.2 metres above the base. No other 4th dynasty major pyramid has an entrance at ground level, so a planned larger pyramid explains why we see it with Khafre's. It would have been the main entrance, and according to the hypothesis, the upper entrance was only created because the plan changed to a smaller pyramid early on, but after the lower passageway was already dug. Because of this change in plan, it's likely the lower entrance at ground level was not used, being plugged up and neatly concealed under the courtyard paving. But is there even enough room to build a larger pyramid? Well, when we look from the top, there is certainly enough room for a 470 cubit pyramid, and there is also enough room for a courtyard and boundary wall as well, and within the confines of the quarried area. In fact, by having a larger pyramid, it means the distance from the northern quarry face to the northern wall would be the same as the distance between the western quarry face and the western wall. The positioning of the larger pyramid actually looks more balanced, more symmetrical. As it stands, with the pyramid as we see it today, there is a much larger space to the north. Staying with this diagram created by Keith Hamilton, and on the smaller pyramid with a base length of 411 cubits, we can see that the entrances are displaced by 24 cubits to the east of the north-south axis. But when we grow the pyramid to have a base length of 470 cubits, the entrances are only offset by 5.5 cubits to the west, so they are much closer to the central axis. To be perfectly centred, the pyramid base would have to be 459 cubits, and therefore you could argue that this was the original planned size for the pyramid. But saying that, and we should note that Khufu's entrance was displaced by 14 cubits from the north-south axis, and the Red Pyramid by 7. So pyramids having their entrances on the north-south axis was by no means a standard in the 4th dynasty. So the evidence for an intended larger Khafre pyramid is limited, and it's by no means compelling, but it does seem feasible and maybe even probable. But for balance, you can explain away all the anomalies quite easily as well. For example, a number of 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids do have entrances in the ground, and not in the side of the pyramid. So this ground level entrance for Khafre's pyramid is not uncommon in pyramid building. Maybe it is for the 4th dynasty, but not for pyramids in general. Also, the quarry on the northern side of the pyramid could well have been much closer to the Khafre boundary wall originally. Maybe during the pyramid's construction, the quarry itself was extended to the north, so that workers could have easy access to building stone. As we've seen already, the fact that the entrances are offset to the east of the north-south axis is not a reason to assume it wasn't planned that way, as the entrances to many major pyramids are also offset. So evidence can be presented and countered, and at this stage there is nothing compelling, and so it's down to us pyramid enthusiasts to form our own opinions. But with my research into this topic, I did have another idea I'd like to present, that the Khafre Pyramid was actually a 3-stage construction project, a project that actually stopped at stage 2. Before I get into the specifics, you may recall from my previous videos on the Great Pyramid that the most logical explanation for having 3 chambers inside, the subterranean chamber, the Queen's chamber and the King's chamber, was all down to contingency reasons. You start with the subterranean chamber, and if Khufu did die early, he could be buried below ground. Of course, this would not be an elaborate burial structure, but a small mastaba or very small pyramid could have been built over the top. But as the pyramid grew in size and the Queen's chamber was constructed, if the king died he could now be laid to rest inside that chamber, and the pyramid could either be quickly finished or even given a flat top like some kind of pyramid mastaba hybrid. Khufu's master plan was elaborate, for a granite-lined king's chamber high up in the structure. If he lived long enough to see it complete, that would be his final resting place. That was the plan. But with the huge blocks of granite high up inside the structure, the king's chamber was a bold and brave construction project to say the least. And although the architect was clearly a genius, there was no guarantees it would work. But if it failed, or if Khufu died early, he still had the Queen's chamber to fall back on. I assume that Khufu did live long enough because the Great Pyramid was completed, and I imagine he was laid to rest inside the King's chamber, leaving the Queen's chamber and subterranean chamber abandoned and unused, and in the case of the subterranean chamber, unfinished. So if Khufu did build his pyramid so strategically, why wouldn't Khafre and also Menkaure follow suit? Well, I think it's possible they did, but in a slightly different way. I can look at the evidence mentioned, and also look at the layout of the internal chambers and passages of the Khafre Pyramid, and offer my own hypothesis that his pyramid project had a construction sequence, which just like the Great Pyramid was for contingency reasons, in case the king did die early. The evidence is limited and circumstantial at best, I admit that, but I do think it's feasible. Like with the Great Pyramid, at the start of the Khafre Pyramid project, they began by building a subterranean chamber, this chamber, known today as the lower chamber. This, in my opinion, is Khafre's contingency burial chamber. It's large, has an east-west orientation like the main burial chamber, but is actually quite rough and looks to be in an unfinished state. Flinders Petrie noted the poor state of the ceiling. It's like the work was begun and then abandoned, with the coarse workmanship still on display today. I think that this chamber and also the lower descending passage, which was discovered in 1837 and was found to be plugged, was phase 1 in Khafre's burial monument. And if the king was to die early, a small pyramid or mastaba could be built over the top, and the king would have an acceptable yet unspectacular burial structure. But whilst this chamber was being cut from the bedrock, or just after its rough form had taken shape, work began on the main burial chamber, which was always planned to be the final resting place of Khafre. The pyramid builders joined up this chamber to the underground system of passages, and as they began to build a pyramid over the top, they also built a second passage through the masonry. That's because I think it's possible that the Khafre Pyramid we see today was actually phase 2. An enormous pyramid, yes, but not the completion of Khafre's master plan. The Pyramid of Khafre, as we know it, is not as ambitious as his father's neighbouring pyramid. There are no internal chambers, passages or grand galleries within the masonry, and although it is still an incredible feat of engineering, it was a somewhat easier project compared to the Great Pyramid. Once the Stage 2 pyramid was complete or near completion, maybe the casing stones were added and maybe they were not, the decision would have to be made as to whether or not they go to phase 3, to turn a good pyramid into a truly great ambitious pyramid, taller than any other structure in the known world. The foundations were already laid, the passages were already cut into the bedrock, and so what was left to do from phase 2 to phase 3 was to add more masonry onto the northern and eastern sides of the existing pyramid. If the larger phase 3 pyramid was to be built, the upper entrance would have been closed off and lost inside the pyramid masonry. the lower entrance would be extended so it opened up 6.5 metres above ground on the pyramid's new northern face. For reasons I can only speculate to, the decision was made to finish the project early, and if it wasn't already, the Phase 2 pyramid was cased. Maybe Khafre had died. Maybe his health was going downhill. Maybe there was a financial or labour burden. Maybe the powerful priests at Heliopolis opposed the extra cost. Or maybe the foundations were just not strong enough, and if the pyramid grew in size, there was a genuine fear of collapse. I don't know and could never know, of course. But we should also note what I presented in my last video, which I've linked below, that the Khafre burial chamber was also never completed. The planned partition wall was never erected, and red construction lines were still seen on the walls in the 19th century. So, there is good reason to assume the king died early, or maybe his health started to go downhill, and that was before the pyramid project was complete. So, in my hypothesis, Khafre stopped at Phase 2. They closed the lower portcullis, the lower passageway was plugged up with limestone blocks, the courtyard was paved, and then a perimeter wall was erected around it. Only an architect would know the pyramid was shorter than Khufu's. We're only talking a few metres, and to the untrained eye, Khafre's pyramid did look taller anyway, because it was built on higher ground and arguably in a more prominent position on the Giza Plateau. If all Khafre really wanted to do was show off his strength and power by building a pyramid larger than his father's, well, technically he didn't have to go into Phase 3, because it looks like it was mission accomplished. No further stonework was done in the lower chamber, although it was plastered, and was therefore likely used as a storeroom for the king, but the lower descending passageway was certainly closed off, as plugging blocks were found inside. I now think that each of the main pyramids of Giza could have had a multi-phase plan for contingency reasons, and I believe that Khafre's son King Menkaure saw his pyramid project through all the way to the end, and that's because of this blind passage, which ends abruptly within the pyramid's core masonry. He also had an elaborate granite-lined burial chamber, but this looks to be a later addition, a later phase of work, because the western end of the Menkaure upper chamber was clearly earmarked for a sarcophagus, yet there is no evidence a coffer was placed in this position. It's like Menkaure took his pyramid a stage further, whilst Khafre did not. According to my hypothesis, this is the first pyramid of Menkaure, an earlier phase in the construction process. Like this is the first pyramid of Khafre. If Khafre's pyramid project was completed, I imagine the upper passage would have met the same fate as Menkaure's, leading nowhere and becoming lost in the pyramid. In fact, by analysing Menkaure's pyramid, it could help us to understand Khafre's construction process. It's also worth noting that the great IES Edwards suggested the lower chamber was originally planned to be Khafre's burial chamber, but he thought the entire Khafre pyramid plan changed, with the apex moving further to the south, and so a new burial chamber had to be constructed. I don't think there was a change in plan, but that it was simply built as a contingency, if the king met an early fate, or if the project ran into problems. As you can tell, the idea I presented in this video is very much in an early stage of research, and I could find something that dismisses it altogether, and I'll keep you posted with how I progress. Ironically, sometimes the great thing about the pyramids is the lack of written information, because by looking at the stonework itself, it allows us to hypothesize and wonder. I enjoy problem solving, and although the Giza pyramids do pose many problems, ones that may never be solved, well, I certainly enjoy trying. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, Please like the video and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.